Transparency in the supply chain is a major topic in the bike industry. We have a global supply chain in the bike industry, and therefore it's very important that we have a close look to the countries we work with and the suppliers we work with, and to really find out where do we have heat maps and problems and risks that we have to face, which means transparency is essential to find out where you have to dig deeper and where you have to work on to solve problems in the sustainability chain also. So we started to work on this transparency of our supply chain almost 2 years ago. And we found a big cooperation within our suppliers. So most of the suppliers were super cooperative in working with us to make the supply chain more transparent. But of course, there's also suppliers that are reluctant and that we have to convince to work with us. And if you go to tier 2 and tier 3, it of course gets even more complex because we are dependent on what our suppliers do with their suppliers. So yes, there is opposition, but in general I have to say there's also a big openness to this topic and a big cooperation in our supply team. The Sustainable project, which is a cloud project where we try to find out more about the transparency of our supply chain. And Sustainable is a company that also helps us to connect our supplier net with a heat map, which means a map of risks that you usually have in some countries, be it modern slavery or be it corruption. That does not mean that our suppliers in those countries have the problem, but at least we get a better insight into the countries and in possible problems. And what we found out that this topic is very, very complex and it's a lot of work to do. And our suppliers were able to put in their data. And so we found out that there's a couple of suppliers that are also interested in working with Sustainable. And at least what we know from today, because we have no super deep insight who really works now with Sustainable besides our suppliers, there's a big interest. And there's other businesses in the bike industry that also want to work with sustainability. What we see that when we started to work on the transparency of our supply chain, it was right before the pandemic started, and we had big goals, especially in terms of visiting also our suppliers on a global base, to do visual audits by ourselves and to do external visual audits. But of course, even now it's quite difficult to visit all of our suppliers and to see where they are. So it is still a very hard topic to dig deeper into the supply chain with a really physical presence. It's still, even though the pandemic is slightly over, or at least we are back to kind of normal life, it's much more difficult to get a physical, deeper insight into the supply chain. So we try our best, but still we are not on the same level as we planned to be before the pandemic. Our first and utmost target is to have a customer on a bicycle riding safely, which means if we are looking for an ecological product or component, of course, even safety has to come first. And sometimes today we have to make the decision that the less ecological component is safer, so we have to decide for this component today. But our foremost initiative is to look at all of the components and to look where can we have a sustainable alternative to either work with our suppliers or to look for other suppliers in the long term, in the next 5 years, to have really every component an ecological component, be it recyclable, such as the material of the frame, for example, aluminum, to look for recyclable or a circular designed framed, or be it a product that is of other materials, of more natural resources materials, So we go one by one and have to work with each component supplier to work on a more ecological basis, which is quite a very complex project, but it also makes a lot of fun because we see super innovative products, we see super innovative suppliers and new companies coming into the market and really also pushing us and challenging us to look into the future and look into a more sustainable future. But as of now, we have 120 components in our products. I cannot say that all of the components are sustainable in this year.